talk about freedom of speech, we are talking about something substantive, and we're not simply talking about a formal notion of freedom of speech. And those who would call for the right to speak freely in order to openly prevent others from having rights and liberties that are guaranteed then by the Constitution, I mean, I think that is a contradiction in terms. I mean, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to advocate genocide, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to organize genocide, to organize murder and racism, then that doesn't make any sense at all. I think it's very clear.
Good evening. Welcome to Under Another Name. It's Joe on duty this evening. James is hiding behind the camera. He's on production duties. And today we're going to be talking about protest, free speech, and why anti-racism is an active process and not a badge of honor. We started with a short quote there from Angela Davies. Angela Davies asks us there to think a little bit more carefully about what we mean when we talk about free speech. We should be cautious about these kind of narratives of free speech that we're presented with, which often are about empowering people who are already dominant within, the social kind of hierarchy. And often, therefore, free speech can be used to kind of exclude people whose voices are already kind of trodden down. They're on the wrong side of the patriarchy, on the wrong side of structural racism, these things that are embedded in the DNA of Western countries. So those are kind of some of the things we're going to talk about this evening. And we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by Gemma Waldron, also known as Project Coup, who I think is making her screen debut this evening, which I wasn't kind of like, I sort of feel a bit mean because I put this in a WhatsApp message to Gem and she only saw it about an hour ago and she was like, what?
Well, this is on me. Yeah. Hi, thank you for having me. That is completely on me because when someone sends me a WhatsApp message, that I have so many on the go at once, I just skim read absolutely everything I ever get sent. So I'm so used to being on the airwaves and not sort of having a camera in front of me that I was just like, oh, it must just be a recorded chat or something, and he's going to put it in a podcast. And then I read back and I was like, oh, I've just found out that this is going to be a live stream, and I've never done one of those before. And I was like, I guess I should like wash my hair. And then I accidentally sent a text to you, which was meant for my girlfriends, where I was like, oh my God, shit.
I felt like you were then, I got worried because I saw it for like a second. I was like, oh no, she's blaming me, like she's cross. It wasn't really, you just meant it was just a joke for your friend. So, we've had a bit of drama to kick it off, but that's fine. And the good thing is, Gem, obviously you're experienced broadcaster. You've been doing your show on Incapable Staircase on Monday evenings for nearly a year. Is that right?
Yeah, about a year. Yeah, soon. In a couple of weeks, it'll be a year. Yeah.
Brilliant. And James and I are still very much novices in comparison. So we're really, as I say, really grateful to have you on the show. It'd be good, I think, just to kick us off then, just tell us a little bit more about the show that you present and just kind of your politics. Where do you come at some of the issues that we're going to be discussing this evening?
Okay, so my show, Project Coup, just kind of started as a little lockdown project. My friend decided to start an internet radio station. He was kind of fidgety and he was furloughed and whatever. And it was just like him playing some songs, and he decided to he figured out how to broadcast it. And then it grew into this big station. And now we've got like 60 DJs and it plays constantly, like 24 hours a day. There's some playbacks and stuff going on. And after he'd been doing it for like about a month, he was like, we really need some women DJs. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and then he was like, oh, maybe you need like a concept for your show. And I immediately thought, I don't really know how I came up with the name, but I can tell you my whole life story. You're going to regret asking me this, Joe. This is what happens. But yeah, I just thought I want to talk about politics. That's all I ever talk about. A lot of my friends don't really like talking about politics. So why don't I just exploit this opportunity to talk freely about politics? My politics are not particularly far left. I think probably the British narrative of what is far left is really not very much in the if you look at it in an international kind of scope. But yeah, I'm a socialist and probably leaning towards becoming a communist, like my my earrings here.
Oh, wow.
But
Yeah, I
well,
like
yeah, I
that.
made the
That's a
effort.
great
I hope you
flex.
appreciate it.
Is
Yeah.
it both Marks, or is it Marks and Engels? What have you got going on there? I couldn't
Oh, I
quite
don't
see.
know. I've got Frida Kahlo, but
Oh, it's Frida
actually, I
Kahlo.
don't know
Oh,
if you can see
amazing.
that.
Sorry, I didn't get it close. I just kind of guessed. It's
Can you
bad,
see?
obviously
Can you
confusing
see
Marks.
Mark's? Mark's is
Oh,
over there.
there he is. You see, he's hiding behind the
He's
guitar.
never far away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I like it.
but apart from my show, I'm just I'm a copywriter. I just write kind of puff pieces, basically. And that's what I quite like writing my blog, because it is a bit more nitty gritty. It's just something I've just started recently doing. And I've got 3 children, teenagers, and yeah, that's
Cool.
basically the
So,
most
and you can
interesting
check
thing.
out your blog is Project Coup. Is it .com?
.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, do check it out. A lot of what we speak about this evening, Gem's kind of gone into in more depth in her blog. So do take a look. And also we share a Wiltshire connection, Gem.
We
Now,
do, yeah.
I grew up in Marlborough, which is a small town in North Wilts, and my memory of Marlborough is it wasn't wildly populated with socialists. And I think you're from not too far away, and so I guess it's a similar kind of experience.
Yeah, I mean, they do come out of the woodwork every now and then, and it's kind of like it is like a coming out when you're a socialist around here, because it's very frowned upon. It's kind of like, oh, we are so radical. But yeah, I mean, I started like a little community group recently called Mums Brief for Democracy, basically because I was like, we don't need to go into the big cities to make our voices heard and like show solidarity. We can like make our own little movement going on here. And it's actually like accrued about 70 odd members. So I'm really, really pleased. Yeah. Yeah. So
real grassroots democracy right there.
Proper. Yeah. Really
Love
proud of it.
It makes me, certainly as a Wiltshire man, it makes me feel very proud, I must say. Let's get into talking about the first topic for the evening, which is the Kill the Brill protests that will be going on in Malmesbury, of course, this Saturday, but also in Bristol, in London, Brighton, where me and James are, up in Manchester, and actually big cities all across the country. Now, when I was reading your blog earlier in the week, the quote that leapt out on me from your first post is that amazing quote from Rosa Luxemburg. The most revolutionary thing one can do is always proclaim loudly what is happening. And I thought I'd just start by asking you, what's happening? You know, what is it that's going on with this bill that is so important that people come out, you know, if they're thinking about coming out on Saturday, and actually take a stand?
Well, I'm not an expert on absolutely anything, so everything that I say tonight is just going to be my random opinion. And
what you're on for, Gem.
Disagree with me. Okay, just like get that like imposter syndrome thing going on, you know. But basically, I think what's kind of, well, there is something unique in this bill in that actually it affects like well, not a huge cross section of society, but I think a huge cross section of society is actually bothered about it. So it obviously is going to discriminate against marginalized people in our society more so, but I think a lot more people are kind of coming out and recognizing it as something to be really concerned about and seeing it as a wider pattern of, I don't know, it always feels dramatic to talk about like totalitarianism and stuff, but I think people are noticing a nasty kind of sinister sort of pattern going on with pushing through the spy cops bill, overseas operations bill, and stuff like that as well. And on top of that, you know, at the same time, you know, like supported by the media, the government's kind of peddling a lot of like, you know, anti-immigrant propaganda, anti-traveller propaganda. You know, we know that Priti Patel decried the BLM protests last year as, I think, what did she say? I can't remember what she said about them. She said they were dreadful, you know. So I think this bill is kind of, it's a bit of it feels like a wake-up call, and I hope it is. Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing like kind of national reaction that is happening, I think.
Yeah, and it has been, right. And I haven't been in the demonstrations that have happened in Brighton. It, you know, it has felt like it's been a largely young crowd, but not exclusively. And it's felt like the galvanizing effect of it has been like, so everyone gets it. Everyone gets why this matters. And that's, you know, interesting, because then I guess it would be easy to sort of say, well, you know, this is just, you know, the issue of free speech is in some sense an abstract one. You know, it's not directly related to, you know, your living conditions or whatever. But there's just something quite visceral actually that people feel. I think particularly this idea that a protest that's noisy, a protest that's a nuisance, is actually something that's criminalized under this bill. And so I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has been that that's generated a sense of real outrage and actually kind of fear to some extent about where this is heading.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the subjectivity element of the bill and the wording. I think that one of the words in the bill is something that creates unease, and I think that's an extremely dangerous thing, having that much sort of subjectivity, especially when the people who are empowered to decide what is what causes unease are the police, and we know that they are notoriously heavy-handed. They just are. And Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, who is not known for her human rights credentials. Let's say. I mean, it's been recognised in court, hasn't it, that she's contravened human rights. The things that she is the direction that she's trying to go in is in direct, contravention to human rights. I mean, I was protesting with a woman who is in her 60s, if not 70s, maybe her sort of late 60s. And she said she did Reclaim the Night marches and stuff back in the 80s. And she said she's angry that she's got to do this again. Everyone's coming at this for different motivations and stuff. We don't want the police to have disproportionate amount of power. They already do. Although I would say, we were just talking about living in kind of, quite right-wing areas, and I live in pretty affluent, small town where, like I said, you have to come out as a socialist, and a lot of people here are really enthusiastic about the bill. They're actually putting something on the Facebook town group chat, saying, this is really something to be concerned about. People are like, well, I'm glad. I want the police to protect, law and order, my, property, and I don't want there to be pesky protests and stuff. And I think there's just an awful lot of privilege shining through in that way.
Yeah.
But it has been kind of nice to see people come out of the woodwork and surprising, people that I wouldn't expect to show solidarity. So sorry, I talk
there's
so
something
much.
Just nice. No. It's as I say, I can't hear enough about North Wilt's activism against this bill or anything. But I think what the other side of that story is important, isn't it? That actually there's 40% of the population, and maybe a bit more, that this is really targeted at. And in the sense, it's not even, I don't think, what the bill is going to do specifically, or whether indeed the bill is even that helpful or useful for the police, as much as it is just there to galvanise that section of the electorate that this government has basically decided, if it riles them up enough, if it convinces them that there are these enemies that it's cracking down on, then essentially it doesn't matter. Johnson can spend whatever he likes decorating his house, or it's all just going to blow through, basically, because they're they've got a very clear side. If we've got this culture war in progress, they've aligned themselves very clearly. There's nobody really politically who's taking them on the other side of that. So the terrain is kind of theirs in some sense, and that I find quite worrying.
Yeah, I mean, the basic notion of freedoms of speech is the principle that people can say what they like without reprisal, and this idea, which included the right to assemble, along with freedom of religion and freedom of the press, began in the States, obviously towards the end of the 18th century. Over here, we've got a long and complex history of censorship, but as recently as about 30 years ago, we had a specific right to freedom of expression sort of passed, though that was subject to formal conditions as well. But basically, most things which emancipate the voiceless, they get kind of co-opted into these right-wing movements, and in recent years, they've been exploited to provoke situations that are designed to roll back the gains that we've made. That we've arguably made as a tolerant society, though obviously there'll be a lot of people that society is hostile towards still, and I completely accept that. But I think it's really difficult, obviously, because free speech has become weaponized in the culture war, and people like Lawrence Fox that are using it to spread hate and intolerance, and then kind of make a situation where you can use language like snowflakery and cancel culture and stuff
Woke,
like that,
etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's something that's like become necessarily complex, and I think like because of the dangers that it can throw up. So, like there's that famous line, "I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which I think is like often wrongly attributed to Voltaire, but it wasn't. It was his
Oh, I should know
biographer,
that.
Evelyn Hall or something. I think
Yeah,
it was.
yeah, we'll roll with it. You're right. It's
Yeah,
definitely not Voltaire, but Voltaire's
yeah.
supposed to have said it. It's the kind of thing he sort of would have said.
Yeah. But I mean,
One of
I
those.
read something recently that, and I might be sort of going slightly off piste here, but I read something recently that can be, it kind of identifies the problem of like collapsing the distinction between free speech and academic freedom, which is something that you're probably interested in as a teacher, which like allows a situation where the right can like deny educational professionals, professors, of the authority of knowledge. So that's kind of interesting. And obviously I can see how this could be seen to be like defensive about knowledge and the rights to knowledge, because like also this is increasingly complex now, because like as universities become like increasingly neoliberal models, this could be used by institutions to diminish like lived experiences as knowledge in both literature and in the students that's passing through its doors, so there's layers and layers of, I've come away
Yeah.
from the bill now, but yeah, there's.
No, I think it's really important though, in that context of like the weaponization of the issue on the right. I think it is crucial for this, because it's fascinating, isn't it, that you have this whole section of the media, right-wing politicians who are essentially posing as defenders of free speech, while at the same time they'll be supporting this bill, which is very definitely curtailing people's right to protest. They'll also be saying things like, it's outrageous that the National Trust conducts research into the history of its own houses, if that history relates to things that they don't want to talk about in British history, like slavery, colonialism, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be angry about sportsmen choosing to take the knee before a sporting event. Perfectly, just their moral choice as kind of free citizens. So the right is deeply confused on this issue, and yet it's been really, really effective nevertheless at co-opting it. And exactly as Angela Davies suggests at the start of our show today, that point that speech can be used in this very, very violent way. It can be used to close down other people's ability to speak freely. And I think that's something that I find really worrying about this bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's been embraced by this movement, which like we saw it in the States with like, Donald Trump, like anti-intellectualism and he talked about left-wing indoctrination in schools, and then he set about wanting to create like a national commission to push what he called like a more pro-American history, putting a stop to educating kids about slavery and racism, basically. I mean, so he pursued this anti-intellectualism narrative, and that was like a vote winner the first time round, right? Not the second time.
Yeah.
But I think Boris Johnson sort of relied on the same sort of strategy in a way, which has obviously been interesting while we like navigate a health crisis where science is first and foremost. My history is appalling, but I think like anti-intellectualism in America came with like McCarthyism, so that's really interesting. Like when you were talking about shutting down, because curious minds, no sort of oppressive state wants that in its people, does it? Yeah.
And I think it's interesting where those questions can lead you. So like, you talked about the way in which in the history of recent in the UK, yes, there have been efforts to open up, greater freedoms to people, but you still have communities that are right on the margins. So I'm thinking here about particularly the GRT community, kind of, they're right in the line of fire with this bill. This is essentially a bill that threatens to totally extinguish their way of life. And yet, if you're not asking questions, you can almost miss it in the public debate, even from people who are quite sympathetic to the cause. It still kind of sits on the margins of the discussion, and that to me is kind of just symptomatic of our whole debate around these issues.
Yeah, I have to say, I think our elected representatives could be doing and saying a lot more. We know that the government has complete monopoly over the press and institutions and stuff, and I am kind of a bit baffled by the amount of people that don't even know what's going on with this bill, haven't heard of it, don't care. Like that, but I think everyone's just so busy, just like surviving, paying their rent, getting to the end of the week, feeling knackered. But yeah, like I would like, you know, so-called left-wing MPs to be a lot more vocal about it. I know a lot of them are doing some really good work surrounding it and stuff. But like you say, like I do wonder whether, and like you say, you know, GRT communities are going to be, you know, it's an existential threat to them, and also, I mean, Clive Lewis, when I spoke to him earlier in the week, was saying that, you know, he thinks it'll go through, and he thinks that the government will ask, or, you know, direct police to be light, give it a light touch, like don't go in heavy-handed. But then that'll give them kind of free rein, the government that is, to like be selective about who they target and then make examples of and stuff like that. So it's bloody terrifying, like, to be honest.
Yeah. And that whole idea of state power, which is basically like, okay, you know, we might not do this every time, but we can, and you know that we can, and you don't know when we might. You know, that I think that whole aspect of it is not really considered, because for so many people, they have that privilege that you referred to earlier, which is the privilege to say, they're not coming for me, I'm okay. You know, so as far as I'm concerned, these guys, you know, they're basically protecting my rights, my property, you know, my kind of like my peace of mind within my neighborhood or whatever it is. You know, this kind of like the scaremongering that exists around these, you know, the threats to, you know, sort of good property owning citizens. You know, so you get all those kind of constructs that really start to appear. And I guess the natural follow-up question I have is kind of like, why can we not look to, as so many people will on this, we're not looking to the right with their kind of like phony free speech narrative, but then the next place a lot of people will look will be, okay, what about liberal people? You know, people on the liberal left. You know, liberals are supposed to be, this is supposed to be their thing, right? Defending these kind of freedoms, supposed to be absolutely fundamental to liberalism, and yet we have, you know, I was just thinking as you were talking, I think the shadow. Is it the Shadow Equalities Minister? I think Charlotte Nichols, who was you know, highlighted for basically you know, having anti-GRT literature in her election materials.
Yeah.
Why is it that this? You talked about it in your interview earlier this week with Judy Gattis. This liberal hope that we kind of always looking to. Why is that not really the answer?
Yeah, I think like Judy Gattis had it like down straight, really, the way that she talked about it. Like, she's a revolutionary communist, so to her, like, she extends this idea of liberalism to like even as far left as Corbyn's leadership, which most of us who in the left know that it wasn't that far left. It was democratic socialism, basically. And again, like, you know, from a international perspective, it's really not very far left at all, and that revolutionary even. But and obviously, like, the Overton window in this country is shifting to the right all the time, which is another pattern of like what these bills are like bringing about. But like the left of now, like, I don't know, I think it kind of sells an idea that we can have incremental change and that's enough, and that's all we can do. Like, I think it's like we have to work within the systems that we have and do what we can. And it just seems so unambitious and kind of depressing, to be honest. Like, especially because, like, you know, in our 2019 Labour manifesto, we had all the solutions to, well, not all the solutions, but we had some big, you know, visions of how, and fully costed, you know, policies of how we could deal with some of these big problems, like COVID or no COVID. Like, a lot of big structural inequalities and problems would have, like, you know, persisted anyway. So when we're looking at, like, you know, an economical a climate emergency and an economical emergency crisis, you know, solutions of liberals is kind of like, oh, we can have a little bit of capitalism, we can have a little bit of incremental change, a bit of reform here. Like, it's just not enough. Like, do you value your grandchildren? Like, you know, this is it's just really uninspiring, personally.
Yeah, it's that kind of trimming, you know, just pruning away, and you're just thinking, whoa, there's like a storm over there. Like, are we gonna do anything about that, or are we just gonna kind of keep on trimming away? Yeah.
it's kind of a gaslighting effect as well, because it's
Yeah.
kind of like, you know how everyone always talks about how Orwellian this government is. Well, I think liberals are quite Orwellian. Like, you know, every bit as such as the government. Like I mean, the government blatantly tell us like, oh, we're well off out of the EU. Oh, we're taking back control. You know, selling ideas that we've never had it so good and stuff like that, which we all know is bullshit. But like liberals sell this like really apathetic and like lazy vision that like doesn't offer real solutions for the planet or the people on it. So it's just but also
Yeah, and it's like, this is the
deliver it.
best you can get. This
Yeah.
is, you know, and it's almost like and you're kind of bullied. Like, if you're the sort of person who's like, well, hang on, really? Like, could we not push a little bit more? This is real, like, quite horrible kind of tone of like mockery. Like,
Yeah.
you absolute idiot. Like, why would you even think
Yeah, and
that there was some
yeah, and exactly, and that is a kind of like my theory on this is that definitely not just mine, but what I think about this is that liberals have I don't know, like the middle classes are kind of comfortable enough to be, I'm all right, Jack, about things, right? So we all make trade-offs. We all exist on this hierarchy, in a patriarchy, which we live in, which the whole bloody world lives in. Like, we exist on this hierarchical structure where we make trade-offs and we feminize one another. You know, it's a gender thing, but that doesn't relate to like binaries or anything. But you know, we by you know, hurling insults, exclusions, like perceived failures and stuff like that. So as long as there's someone beneath us, we're I don't know, reaping the scraps of patriarchy, sort of thing. So I talked to Judy. I'm not explaining this very well at all, but
I think I'm getting you completely.
So in the same way that like white women, you know, we are all capable of you know, putting our heel print on another woman's face, you know, migrants, black women, disabled women. I talk about it as a woman because it's like sort of relates to how I think about things. In order to stay kind of, you know, to the status quo. I think it's like everyone's kind of always thinking, how much could I rock the boat and will it? I mean, to be honest, like the middle classes would benefit from revolutionary solutions as much as anyone else. But I think they just think real short term or something. I don't know. Or they're just Tories and they by any other name.
But there's also, I think you talked about the Overton window, and that is crucial, isn't it? That if, you know, it's important to stress that our entire discourse, you know, is framed around this idea that it's actually very narrow range of choices that's available politically. It's actually incredibly wide, you know. So like you're kind of brought up believing that party are way over there, and Christ, you know, maybe you could vote the Lib Dems in the middle, and it's this you're brought up to think, right, this is like, you know, am I going to go left or am I going to go right? And then the reality, you know, once you sort of stand back from it, as you say, you take that more global perspective, it's this teeny tiny kind of these divisions that exist. And then again, that really quite ruthless policing, you know, of anyone who dares to kind of suggest that there might just be another way of looking at things, or it might be possible to be a little more ambitious. I also feel like for some of the people on the sort of liberal left, there's that kind of, they kind of like to conceptualize themselves as quite left wing. And it's kind of annoying to have people who are sort of saying, well, actually, you know, I don't think you really are. I don't think your ideas really are offering that much change.
Yeah, and I think if I'm being generous, then I'd say that that's kind of an image thing. Like, I don't know, like you know how like middle-aged men like pick up a guitar every now and then and tell their kids, oh, I was in a band once. Like, I think that's kind of like the liberal, I'm a leftist kind of thing. But that's just if I'm being generous. If I'm being more like, I don't know, like suspicious about it, then I would say that this is a, you know, it's a technique, it's a strategy to keep things right. If you call something left that's not left for long enough, that's you know, quite right wing, then people will be like, oh, that must be, oh, that's really, you know. So I forgot what I was going to say, but basically I've forgotten what I was going to say.
No, what you said, I totally, I'm gonna keep, you know, keep rolling, Gem. Like I like, it's just pouring out this this content. I like it. And
I'm sorry, I've had such a busy week. I've been talking to so many different people.
Clive Lewis. That is amazing, right? I mean, talk about Project Coup. That is, that I'm looking for. So that's coming up on Monday, right?
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna do another. Yeah.
I mean, I've interviewed a few big names. I really like talking to just ordinary everyday people, because it's like, you know, these are the issues that are affecting all of us, kind of thing. But it's quite fun every now and then to, like, you know, push it a little bit. But sorry, we should go back to what we were talking about, liberal hope.
Well, I think I
actually,
know I'll probably forget something.
Clive's got a lot of that liberal hope, you know.
Yeah, I felt that. Yeah, go on.
So Clive's identifies sort of as a socialist, but also, you know, sometimes he does, but also he's very keen other times, like, not to put labels on things. This is just my perception. He hasn't said this to me, but you know, his route to power, like, to, you know, get these solutions, get this, you know, find socialism, is, I suppose he's looking at, like, the Biden kind of approach, which I think he, you know, I think a few people have been fairly surprised by how it's going and stuff like that, actually. But he is really, he talks a lot about, like, finding, you know, building cross-party alliances and stuff like that, and working with people across the House. And I think that's something that a lot of, like, you know, committed leftists find really difficult to do, because it does mean, you know, sitting in a room with people that have a very different approach to you and a different end game to you. So I don't really know how that ideologically, like, aligns, but yeah, I mean, yeah, he definitely, to me, seems like a person who would push liberal hope, to be honest, and I don't like him for that. I like him for other stuff. I think he's a lovely, charming, nice, decent person, but I think he's been, in all honesty, kind of weak, like, when it comes to, I don't know, he tries to say it as he sees it, and I know that there are limitations as to, you know, your seat in the House or whatever, but, like, I think he could do more. I think the whole of the left in the Labour Party could do a lot more. Like, I've completely given up on the Labour Party. I'm not going to vote for them. I don't want anything to do with them. But if I'm looking at it objectively, I would say the Socialist Campaign Group have a really weak position in the party, and I actually think part of that is on them, because they've rolled over to some extent. And I appreciate how difficult it's been with Keir Starmer's leadership, personally, how I feel, but, like, but yeah, it just seems weak, the whole influence. I don't think there's any left influence in the party, really.
No,
which I think will be a problem for Keir Starmer when it comes to polling as well. But, like,
it's already
it's a lose-lose. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I've always said that the thing that, in the end, well, the thing that made me realise that it wasn't worth supporting Starmer wasn't just that I, you know, became aware that he didn't really have much interest in achieving transformational change, although that was frustrating. It was also just, I realised he was just really bad at political strategy. Like, that's supposed to be the thing he's good at, and it's just like, he's really not. He's traded in a load of voters who are really, like, enthusiastic about the Labour Party. They'll not only vote for it, go out and campaign for it. A lot of those voters have gone, and he's basically chasing some of that really rock solid 40% that we spoke about earlier, where to outbid them in terms of, like, to win them over from the Conservative Party. What are you going to do? Are you gonna kind of, like, you know, sentence people for 20 years for vandalizing a statue? You know, what's the kind of, like, there's no logic to it. People are, you know, if that voting group are pretty sort of attached at the moment to the Conservative Party. So I just feel like, you know, but then again, Starmer for me embodies that idea of liberal hope. He's that classic example of he's pretty vacuous. You can project what you like onto him. Crucially, he's a man of a certain age. He's been a lawyer. You know, he personifies that kind of whole, like, adults in the room dynamic that liberals just love, right? And it's sort of like,
I talk about this. I talk about this a lot. It doesn't matter what you say; it's about how you're saying it. And what we've been conditioned to, like, respect in this country is, and everywhere else really, is, like, the final word of the you know, the calm, rational, forensic white man. Like, you know, this is what we privilege those things. You know, don't be emotional. Don't, you know, I think emotion should be in politics. Politics is emotional. It's really emotional. Like, it's really instinctual as well, I think. That might be a kind of naive thing to say, but yeah, I mean, I think, like, again, you know, he is terrible at strategy, and obviously he's being advised by people. It's not just him, but you could say he's terrible at strategy, or you could say, is this a kind of, like, and it's going to sound like conspiracy theory, but, like, is this a kind of plan? Is he just being, like, is he placeholding for a bit? I mean, I don't think he wants to get into power. I don't actually think he wants to, because I think, like, my you know, I think my 13-year-old could come up with, a better strategy than what you've got at the moment. It's just so basic. Exactly. So like, when I said, it doesn't matter what you say, it matters how you say it. Like he's appealing to he's appealing to what he thinks is like the red wall, peoples. He's always got a pint in his hand, he's like, he's always
on the borderline alcoholic at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, but he only takes one sip. So, and then it's just a photo op. And then, and I think it's very patronizing, like, we're working class, lads. Like, Jesus Christ, do you think that's all people care about? Like, a lot of people in the red wall, like, have really important concerns like employment, poverty, and their children's education and stuff like that. Not everyone is just a bloody Neanderthal, and I think that he's gone from this like people's vote character to like this, like, it's so transparent. That's the really strange thing about it.
Totally. Yeah. I think once you realize,
you might notice I'm not his biggest fan.
Well, no, and nor am I, but I think, and I'm not in that. I've seen that idea on the left that this is, he's a placeholder or whatever. I don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe that is because I've been in that sphere of politics, the sphere that Keir's in, Mr. Starmer, whatever. And so for me, I know it so well. When you live in the sort of like in centrist politics, you believe in the verities really strongly, right? So like, that whole thing, like 1980s to 90s, that's like your origin story. Like, so for you, it's like, okay, we beat the hard left, we saw them off with our, whatever, and then we found this kind of telegenic leader, and he led us to the promised land, and and what so essentially you just take this like one like contingent set of historical things that happened, and you turn them into this sort of like, this is how the whole of politics works forever, basically. And it's once you realize that that's all it is, you're like, oh, it's actually a bit rubbish.
Yeah, that's kind of so interesting to hear it from that point of view. Like it really is, actually, because like I've never been there. Like I don't know why, really, because like I mean I sort of come from working class family, like classic, like we're going to vote Labour because they're going to, I don't know, no policy
they're on the right
or
team.
Manifesto, just basically just like not really looking into it too much, but just like, of course we're working class, so we vote Labour kind of thing. So I haven't been brought up in any kind of like political intellectual sphere whatsoever, but for some reason like I've just always been like on the left. So I look at centrism and I just feel so like weirded out by it, and also sort of skeptical about it, because but like you say, you were there in good faith and actually believed in it as a strategy for the country being better and all of that. Like,
you kind of, I mean, God, I feel like this is like some kind of weird confessional now that I'm having to be, you feel like you sort of think you believe all the stuff you said, like you could just have to trim little bits, and you can't be too over ambitious, it's just silly, like no one's gonna, you just and I think the real limitation of it is that you don't really have any sense of like historical change. So the idea that what's possible in one era can suddenly radically change in a different era. And so for me, that was the big shift, was the recognition that we're now in an era where the possibilities of politics have radically shifted. So it's kind of like this. I in a way, my centrism just made no sense, because it was like, actually, Joe Biden's a centrist, right? I mean, he still is. He's still a centrist. He's just basically recognized the direction of travel in politics, because he's basically got better political nous than Keir Starmer, as far as I can tell. I don't think he's any different to the guy who backed Bill Clinton and was vice president for Barack Obama in a relatively disappointing presidency. Do you know what I mean? But it's just I think
Keir Starmer's like problem, and this might again just be a kind of disgruntled kind of leftist comment, but I genuinely think I don't think he listens. I don't think he's a very good listener. No. I think he's so image conscious, and he's so like, he's quite like arrogant, I think, and fairly stubborn. And I think, I don't know how they're gonna sell their policies to the electorate. So I can understand selling jingoism. I can understand that as a strategy. I don't think it's going to work, but I can understand why they do that. But when it comes to policies, like after we've gone through, I don't know, 3-4 years of a pandemic or however long it's going to last, and a general election comes around, or if it even does, who knows, like they might put another bill through. I just think like they're going to desperately need those radical policies and solutions of the Corbyn project. But I think they've distanced themselves so far from the Corbyn project because they're like, that was bad. That's not us. We're under new management now. So I think what they're probably going to do is repackage some of it and sell it as like a brand new idea. And everyone's going to be like, oh, that's a good idea. like the Tories have done, you know, with a lot of it. But no idea.
I can't see it at the moment. Let's shift our focus a little bit, Gem. Let's delve into some of what's been going on on Twitter this week, particularly on the left, because I think this is also relevant to what we're talking about today. Because you know, we're talking about these issues about like who gets to speak, you know, the kind of the burden of people perhaps who have power or perhaps are higher up in that kind of hierarchy that you referred to earlier to listen and to reflect on what's going on. And you know, we're seeing this kind of, you know, slightly worrying image at the moment of basically people who are advertising themselves as anti-racist, as spokespeople against racism, and actually, you know, engaging in some pretty dubious stuff online. And I know Judy Gaddis spoke about it on your show earlier in the week as well. You know, first of all, just I guess for some of our viewers, it's like, what's going on? Someone's trying to call in to be like James, like, no, I actually can't. It's like one of those. Hopefully, it'll just go off.
Get it.
I actually can't get it because it's one of those fixed line phones.
That's mad. Like,
who
have those anymore? I haven't had.
I know.
That's quite old school.
We're in the dark ages over here in Sussex, I'm afraid. I think we're good. So go ahead.
Before I kind of get into this, like you just said, you know, there's we've been talking about whose voices are privileged and whose aren't, kind of thing. And I think it's like really important to say, first of all, that we're two white people talking about racism and anti-racism. So straight away, we're not like experts in this. And I think that's really important to say. Also, like, so this is referring to like recent events on Twitter surrounding some popular sort of influencer type big voices of the left. And they've been defending the use of anti-Black racist tropes and stereotypes, and then doubling down when called out. So I think it's important to note also that, like, you know, all the people that we follow and interact with on Twitter, most of them are like of the left, but I think they are by no means like the left. Like, I think a lot of serious you know, socialists and comrades probably organize well away from Twitter. So, but I do think it's an interesting microcosm of the left in general. So I'm not going to say this is the left, this is happening in the left, because it's happening in left Twitter, and that's relatively small in the grand scheme of things. But maybe Twitter gives like a fairly good cross section of society anyway, and of the left. So now I've got that out of the way, like, I can only really comment on this as I see it playing out. Like, I know that others will have like different views on this, and from what I've seen, like, I just feel really super disappointed because, like, for me, it's been the out and out hypocrisy of, you know, we on the left are like proud to hold ourselves to higher standards. That's our thing, right? You know, we have the moral high ground, and that's not a static thing. We don't just get to have the moral high ground because we're on the left. Like, we need to, but more so than our right wing and liberal counterparts, we need to work at it. So, like, I mean, I think that means that we should be comfortable calling one another out when we get something wrong and growing from that. Like, the group chat that I meant to send my comment to earlier, but I accidentally sent to you, we are very good at calling one another out. We do it on a regular basis, and I think that's really healthy. And but what happens is that, you know, as human beings, we have like a lot of ego and a need to keep that kind of I'm a very good person intact. So it kind of, when we're practicing anti-racism, like, we have to call attention first and foremost to our own unconscious biases. And that is a difficult process, and it's painful. And that's kind of where white fragility comes into play, because it's like, ouch, I don't want to think this about myself. Like, but, you know, Clive was saying on the show, we're all capable of racism in this country. You know, there's a really, really difficult thing to hear, which is all white people are racist. And what that actually means, and which I completely accept, is we're brought up in a white supremacist society. Some people would disagree, but I think that we are. And And that means, and as Clive said, even he is capable of being racist, and he did mean, anti-black racist, because reverse racism isn't a thing, although that is something that's being bandied about a lot at the moment as well.
And that's because racism is about power, right? I think that's just worth clarifying. Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
The reason that's true is because, there's an actual hierarchy that's observable and sort of like subject to like sociological analysis or whatever. You can't just sort of, I guess prejudice takes many forms, but when you're talking about racism, you're talking about something that's intrinsic to how our society basically functions.
Absolutely. Like some people see, I mean, this kind of started in the US as a concept really, but it's kind of a school of thought over here as well. Some people see like affirmative action to like redress racial inequality as being anti-white. So like to take this further, there's a school of thought that like social and economic gains by black people will disadvantage white people. And this is like white anxiety, I guess you could call it. Like it's in the same kind of vein of that infamous LBC caller that was peddling the great replacement theory to Keir Starmer. And, so we live in a society, when we're talking about free speech, someone is allowed to come on broadcast live on air and say, I think, white people are going to be replaced by, non-white people. And I think that's a very bad thing. And,
and get past the producer, right? That
exactly.
person expressed their idea to a producer. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I'm not for one moment saying that this is the context of the like reverse racism like accusations by like so-called comrades on Twitter, but I do think it sort of dangerously leans into some pretty nasty discourse. So this is the type of thing that we expect to see from like EDL types, not people on the left. Like none of this is about one person, but like we call ourselves a movement and we identify under a relatively broad blanket of socialism, and it's actually a lot broader than I sort of naively gave it credit for, actually. So Dr. Louise Raw has become centered in this, which is, ironic. A white woman has become centered in this debate, which shouldn't be a debate because we're debating people's existence here, which is kind of nasty. But, she's become the focus. And I was like a long admirer of her work. I think she's a really good academic, and I think she raises awareness in a really important way on social issues, and she's done some great activism. But what people fail to acknowledge is that and this includes to a massive extent Louise herself fails to acknowledge this, that while it's possible to have all of these things and all of these credentials, it's also possible to exhibit some problematic behaviors ourselves. And it's it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice, a lot of heartache to kind of get to a point where we can feel comfortable. Well, actually, maybe we just should not feel comfortable. Well, that's the whole point.
I was going to say, is it that we just never get to that point in a way, but you're always kind of working towards it, and that's kind of in itself quite unsettling, isn't it? I think the idea is kind of nice is to just think, I've made it. I'm someone. I teach. I teach a course at my school that's about the history of the interaction of European and African civilizations, kind of trying to center Black history more, although that's fairly limited in lots of ways, but it's sort of trying to at least start some of those discussions. But the truth is you're always coming at it through a European lens. You're kind of every single day you're having to sort of address that reality and the way you've been educated, goodness knows, in Wiltshire. I mean, it's so you're kind of you're still looking through the same pair of eyes, basically.
I mean, it's a process of unlearning what you've kind of learned, basically, and that process never really ends. I make mistakes all the time, and I understand that it kind of hurts to think of yourself in a non-favorable light. I get it. But what we see now is Louise, for example, treating her timeline as some kind of CV where she's reminding us of her anti-racism credentials, where while at the same time she's failing to just robustly address her recent problematic behavior, which would be so easy to do, actually. And at the same time, she does this classic thing where she tweets about having a bad day, nothing ever goes right for her, she's got health problems. So we see textbook white victimhood being centered as a wall that kind of goes up against self-growth. I don't know why I'm acting like I'm some sort of expert on this. I'm not. This is just how I see it, right? So the problem for me is that she has a huge platform and she's got a lot of support while she does this. So I actually think these kind of like unconditional support communities have their place and could be wonderful sources of solidarity. But at the same time, there's like a darker, like more unhealthy side to them, in that they can reinforce toxic behaviors by like providing people with loud and like absolute backing. And I don't think that's healthy. Like, you know, solidarity is one thing, but like, you know, it shouldn't be unconditional. And like Black people's experiences are being further invalidated by, you know, so many things. Like, you know, this is nothing new to my Black comrades. Like, they deal with racism on and off social media all the time. What is perhaps newer is seeing comrades that they previously felt relatively safe around, throwing them under the bus, even though many would probably say that this is something that they've become hardened to. So, Lemonneck, I've forgotten again what I was going to say. So I've just been so surprised. I think there's a slight shift happening now where people are realizing, but basically Black women's voices have just been totally drowned out in all of this. White women's fragility and tears, and they've been weaponizing their tears. You know, we can talk about tears as like a metaphorical thing, even, you know. And again, this is ironically, I keep talking about Louise Raw because it isn't just about her, but she's very emblematic of the white woman who fails with accountability. So she, you know, she, even her silence, like, I'm going off Twitter for a bit, even her silence at like critical moments and stuff. And I know not everyone, you know, lives their life on Twitter, but she does, to be fair. A lot of us do. Even her silence was a kind of, going to rhyme now, is horribly poetic, but it's kind of a kind of violent act, you know. You know, silence is violence. I think it probably says it somewhere on here, like, you know, silence is complicit, silence is violence. So yeah, it's just been like a really bloody interesting time. And I mean, I've lost like followers because I've been really unequivocal in my support for my Black comrades who are having a hellish time right now. Like Desi, my friend, said, this is not pleasant. This is not fun for us. This isn't a game to us. This isn't something that we can dip in and out of. I'm paraphrasing her. She didn't say that exactly, but she said, this is actually really hurtful. It's actually really hard. You know, it actually sucks. It sucks to do this right now, but we have to keep calling it out. And then what we've seen is people trying to moderate Black women's language. So, you know, some of my Black comrades have been pretty forthright with their language. If I was experiencing, you know, oppression because of the color of my skin, I think I probably would be as well. So, but we've had people like saying, you know, why do you have to be so aggressive? I've even seen one of my comrades, which I've since, you know, deleted, unfollowed, whatever, using the word savage. So it's just, it just makes me realize
these tropes kind of creep into the. These tropes kind of just creep into the discourse, and I think it's that thing, as you say, of like you're trying to understand this daily reality. So racialized people just live in this. This is a daily reality that they're kind of, that they're being viewed through this kind of particular prism. That for us as people who've like consumed that, I guess, that those tropes, those kind of things which don't obviously directly affect us, we're just kind of like, they're just shaping like how we're looking at things. You know, we don't necessarily, we can just kind of, you know, allow those lenses to sort of like act on us, and we don't have to sort of almost worry about it too much. I feel like that's the thing I really took away from your interview, is just this sense of like, you know, if I kind of choose, almost like, you know, Britain, I think, what was it like in the recent report on race, it was sort of like Britain gave itself like a gold star, you know, like we're world leaders. But I think you can do that on an individual level, right? It's interesting that obviously people would criticize that, but then on an individual level, it's quite easy to sort of then say, well, you know, I mean, I definitely am a kind of like, I'm an ally, or I'm a, you know, I'm someone who's clearly anti-racist. And I just like this idea of thinking about anti-racism or thinking about allyship as this kind of ongoing process. I think that's just much more useful.
Yeah,
actually,
no one is
much more realistic.
Yeah, totally. Like, no one's an anti-racist. All of these people at the moment, these, you know, Louise Raw, Sarah, Red Sarah, you know, the resisting hate group, which is just a crock of shit, to be honest. They're awful people, in my opinion, just terrible people. They all are avowed anti-racist, and they wear that like a badge of honor, which, you know, it sounds like a nice thing to be, but being an anti-racist isn't a thing. You're not an anti-racist. It's like, it's an ongoing thing. And what I've noticed among the left is, you know, how much people kind of, how protecting whiteness is so pervasive in all sections of society. even among socialists, like, oh God, we think we're so flawless, but we're really bloody not. Like, and also it takes white women to, I mean, a lot of this has gone under the radar, but Black women on Twitter have been like shouting about their pain that they're going through for a very long time. It takes white women coming to the forefront and being in pain. And, we saw Sarah's videos and that was really distressing and awful. But, and Louise saying, oh, no one should have to go through this. I don't think anyone should, but showing no solidarity to the Black women that go through this all the time. Black people have been historically presumed by white people not to feel physical pain in the same way that white people do. And it'd be nice to think that we move beyond that disgusting narrative, but actually Black people are still often treated like appallingly by health services and stuff. But this also transfers to mental anguish. So we prioritize white anguish over Black anguish, and also we don't like listening to it. I think we're neutral towards it at best, or we find it kind of I don't know, like a lot of people have been like, oh, can't you just let this go for the greater good? And it's like, this is the work we need to be doing now. Sorry, I'm going
it's
on
that thing. No, I know, because it's also that thing of individualizing. You individualize white experiences, and you collectivize or you generalize. Like black people, blackness is like this, whereas the individual white person is kind of has this privilege of being treated as an individual, and that experience is kind of lifted up. And I think as you say, it's that's just so fundamental. Like I think those those narratives of slavery that you've touched on, like that whole self-serving narrative of like you say, Black people are just kind of like naturally suited to this work because they feel less pain, and also they're sort of like they're really strong, and so they these things even we think we that kind of that trope of the strong Black woman is one that actually, while it has a sort of I guess there's a kind of utility to it to an extent, I guess, but it's also kind of, it really comes through that whole framework of like the narratives of that essentially justified slavery and colonialism and so on. So I think
it's what's so surprising. Yeah, what's so surprising is that people are failing to see that, even when it's glaringly obvious, and it's pointed out to them quite generously by the people who are experiencing this oppression right now themselves. Like, it's not up to them to educate white people. It's not up to Black people. It's up to us to educate ourselves. And like, I've left several group chats recently. I was in a Zoom meeting earlier in the week with a man who said that he was feeling drained by all this, a white man. And I was like, there was absolutely no irony to it at all. Like no self awareness whatsoever. Like, you're feeling drained, okay, but you can turn off Twitter, step away from this. Like these women can't like step out of their skin in a white supremacist society. So like, should we just do a little bit of work here? And another thing, I think it's the same person actually said, this is almost over. It'll be over soon. And it's like as if it's an inconvenience to us. And they're also kind of peddling now like toxic positivity. Like, we all need to remain positive, which I think is gaslighting, and it also speaks to that liberal hope argument. Like, no, don't tell. I'm sure that moving on positively will come as a great comfort to these women who are being attacked. Like, it's just really disappointing. As you can see, I feel really strongly about it at the moment.
But I think it's about like working out what the bedrock is of what it is you're trying to do, and you're trying to say. So as I say, I'm going to be going on Saturday to the Kill the Bill protests, and I'm going to be raising my voice there, etc. But then you're always having to go back and check basically what your foundations are, I guess, in terms of how you're coming at politics. And for me, as someone who's still very much like getting to grips with left politics, I'm definitely not someone who can advertise themselves as some kind of like pioneer on anti-racism or anything like that. I'm learning all the time. It's really striking to me.
None of us can.
Right. And I think it's kind of genuinely attending these protests is really educational. It's very often actually young Black women who are getting up and speaking and telling their kind of story, and you're there just kind of blown away by it. You just think, wow, that's kind of really.
Black women have led revolutions and made grassroots, inspired like grassroots movements in all of history. Like, and they often get written out of it. Like, oh my God, what's her name? Lucy Parsons, the godmother of what was her name? oh God, what do they call her? The godmother of anarchy, I think they called her. She was
Nice.
amazing. She was the daughter of an enslaved woman. Are we going to get kicked out, by the way? Because it's like an hour.
We're gonna wrap up in a minute, but I want to hear
Okay,
this
cool.
story, and then
Anyway,
we can.
so Lucy
This is a good note to
Parsons
finish on.
she was the daughter of an enslaved woman. Her dad was likely her, a slaver, and she was wonderful. Like, she managed to motivate and inspire like hundreds and hundreds of white working class men to not accept the conditions that they were working in. She used to literally stand on a soapbox and talk at them, like have polemics with them and stuff. And after, she was considered so dangerous by the state that her house was burnt down after her death because she knew too much, So Black women are amazing. Like, they have to be, like, they're so, like, so many Black women are like my inspiration in life, because when you have a lot to overcome and then you achieve massive things, that's bloody impressive. Like, that's awesome, So yeah, Black women's voices need to be listened to on Twitter. Like, stop shouting over them, white men, white women, just stop doing it. Just shut up and listen. That's my message.
I think it's a really
That
good
includes
note
me.
Yeah, right. I mean, as a also quite loud person, I think it's I think that's a good note for me to hear, and a good note to finish on for today's show. I guess just remains for me to thank Gem for giving up her time this evening to talk to us, and I guess just to remind you all that you can listen to Gem interviewing Clive Lewis this Monday at 9:30 on Incapable Staircase. So check it out, because I think that will be amazing. And also do catch up with Gem's previous shows going back. I think you've got a bit of an archive, have you, on the site that people can go back and listen to?
Yeah, I'm still trying to work out how websites work and how to build them and doing the back end of them and stuff like that. But you'll find everything on my website at some point. It's projectcoup.com. Thank you for
cool. Thank you so much. Pleasure. And we are Under Another Name. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks so much for listening.